He stood like a rock, respected, revered, and unshakable in his faith. But now, everything is falling apart. Shocking revelations have rocked the foundation of Bishop J. Drew Sheard's life and legacy, and the gospel community is in disbelief. Whispers that once hid in the shadows of the church have now exploded into the light, and what's being exposed goes far beyond scandal. It's betrayal, heartbreak, and a man pushed to his breaking point. Bishop Sheard wasn't just a leader, he was the symbol of faith, integrity, and purpose in the Church of God in Christ. But what happens when the man everyone believed in finds himself shattered by the very system he helped build? This is the unraveling of a spiritual giant. And what you're about to witness will change everything you thought you knew. His sermons moved nations. His leadership built empires of faith. But behind the pulpit, something was unraveling. Bishop J. Drew Sheard's legacy has touched thousands across the globe, yet hidden behind the polished sermons and family photos was a storm no one saw coming. And now, the cracks are showing. Today, we're peeling back the layers of a man the world thought they knew, because what's emerging is heartbreaking. From sudden health scares and private emotional breakdowns to internal power struggles within the COGIC leadership, the truth is far more painful than the public ever imagined. Whispers of betrayal, financial strain, and spiritual exhaustion are only the beginning. This isn't just behind-the-scenes gossip, it's a raw look at the personal toll of carrying a global ministry. In this video, we reveal the hidden battles, the family fallout, the insider testimonies, and the verified reports that could shake the gospel world to its core. Watch closely, because this story is not just shocking, it's soul-shattering. This is where things take a turn. Before the storm ever hit, Bishop J. Drew Sheard stood tall, not just as a spiritual leader, but as a symbol of legacy, honor, and divine authority. He wasn't simply another preacher climbing the ranks, he was the chosen one, the man entrusted to lead one of the most powerful Pentecostal denominations in the world, the Church of God in Christ, or COGIC. From the very beginning, it was clear that J. Drew Sheard was destined for more than a seat at the table, he was the table. Born in Detroit, Michigan, he inherited more than just a famous name, he carried the weight of expectation, legacy, and faith. His father, Bishop John Henry Sheard, was already a revered figure in the church, a giant whose influence echoed across generations. For J. Drew, this wasn't just ministry, it was inheritance, destiny, and burden all wrapped into one. Rising from humble beginnings as a local pastor, his firebrand sermons, commanding leadership, and unwavering dedication to community propelled him into the spotlight. Whether standing at the pulpit of Greater Emmanuel Institutional COGIC or appearing beside his wife, gospel legend Karen Clark Sheard, his image became almost untouchable, a spiritual dynasty in real time. By 2021, he wasn't just a bishop, he was gospel royalty. But as we now know, even crowns can crack. When he was officially elected presiding bishop of the whole COGIC denomination, no one was surprised, they were proud. COGIC members all over the world celebrated his rise as a new chapter of hope, strength, and unwavering faith. His election meant continuity, family legacy, and deeply held values in a world that was changing quickly. But here's the thing, people held him in high regard, but few knew how much pressure was building behind the scenes. He had to lead a huge denomination during a global pandemic, take care of his aging parents, watch over his daughter's rising musical career, and deal with the constant scrutiny of critics who were waiting for him to make a mistake. But what no one saw coming was how quickly things would start to fall apart, both in public and behind closed doors. To most people, Bishop J. Drew Sheard seemed to have it all together. People thought Bishop Sheard was untouchable, a calm spiritual leader with a strong family and a ministry legacy that couldn't be shaken, but what they didn't see were the cracks slowly and painfully appearing behind closed doors. The first signs were noticed when Bishop Sheard made a few public appearances in late 2022. He looked more tired and drained than usual, and his voice, which had been booming with command and confidence, sometimes sounded heavy. He continued to preach the word, but there was an People close to him said that the weight of leading a global denomination through a spiritual crisis after the pandemic was unlike anything he had expected. Attendance at many churches had dropped, online ministry was changing the landscape, and the COGIC leadership was dealing with generational shifts, disagreements over doctrine, and growing financial concerns that could no longer be ignored. But things were getting even more personal behind the scenes. Bishop Sheard was. There were reportedly serious health concerns in his immediate family, his ailing mother's condition got worse, and the grief over the death of his father, a COGIC icon Bishop John H. Sheard, was still very raw. For J. Drew, losing his father in 2021 wasn't just a personal loss, it was also a devastating spiritual blow that made it hard for him to balance his role as a grieving son and the new face of global leadership. Friends of the Sheard family say he became more private, more cautious, and more. Even faith couldn't easily lift his emotional weight, but like many ministers, he kept preaching through the pain, smiling for the cameras, and going to national events, even though his personal life was slowly falling apart behind the scenes. Then there were the internal conflicts within COGIC, which were so sensitive that they were barely spoken about in public but were tearing relationships apart behind church doors. Some bishops reportedly started questioning his decisions, saying he was too friendly with celebrities and too soft. Bishop Sheard was being seen not only as a leader but also as a target for the first time in his career because he was too involved with his family's business ventures and branding. There were rumors that he and his board were fighting over money management and the future of the church. Tensions in the boardroom spilled over into private calls, voice notes, and side conversations at national meetings. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, something happened that would leave a permanent scar on his face. By early 2023, the public image was so bad that no sermon could easily fix it. Bishop J. Drew Sheard, who had spent decades keeping the church together through storms, was now in the middle of his own, and this time it wasn't happening behind closed doors. The event that started the public falling apart wasn't planned. It wasn't a scandal involving immorality, money, or cheating. It was more real, more human, and maybe even more heartbreaking. It happened during a live service. People who watched the live-streamed service at Greater Emmanuel Institutional COGIC were expecting a powerful message, but what they saw was something completely different. In the middle of his sermon, Bishop Sheard paused, his voice cracked, he tried to continue but got choked up again, he stopped, looked out into the crowd, and after a long, heavy silence, said, "Even the shepherd can get lost." The room was dead silent, with no music or shouting. That video went viral overnight, and worried people on social media flooded his page with prayer emojis and Bible verses. Others, though, started to wonder if he was sick or depressed, or if something was wrong with his marriage or family life. Gospel blogs and church insiders started to look into it, and what they found added more weight to an already heavy story. Sources close to the family said Bishop Sheard had been quietly battling a deep depression for months. He said he had been going to private therapy and had even thought about temporarily stepping down from his CIC duties but was persuaded to stay on by people who thought the public response would be too bad. At the same time, his wife, the gospel superstar Karen Clark Sheard, was under a lot of pressure to tour, manage their daughter's career, and take care of her own spiritual duties while standing by her husband's side. Insiders say the two were united but pushed to the limit, and like any public expectations and spiritual duties made their problems even worse. Then came another blow. An internal COGIC meeting memo that was leaked online said that some members of the church's national board were calling for a re-evaluation of Bishop Sheard's leadership skills because of his emotional state. The term leadership instability was used, which hurt those who had followed him for years because he had dedicated his whole life to serving the church. It was painful and embarrassing for people in the ministry who had given up time, health, and peace to uphold a legacy. Despite this, Bishop Sheard never lashed out, denied the struggle, or publicly explained what was going on. His refusal to defend himself in public only led to more rumors, because the next chapter would show even deeper pain, this time connected not only to the church but also to the people he trusted the most. If the outside pressure wasn't enough, what happened next broke Bishop Sheard's heart. This betrayal hurt him more than any gossip blog or viral moment ever could. It wasn't from enemies, but from people he once prayed with, learned from, and trusted with his vision. Several church insiders and former COGIC leaders began quietly giving gospel media outlets information. Several behind-the-scenes reports say that internal documents and private boardroom recordings were being leaked on purpose, but not to the public at first but to influencers and content creators. People who wanted to start the next big church scandal who were behind it. Sources say that a small group of regional bishops had long been unhappy with Bishop Sheard's leadership style. Some thought he was too focused on building his brand, while others didn't like the celebrity culture they thought was creeping into COGIC through his connections with gospel artists and megachurch pastors. Some bishops also said they felt overlooked for promotions and leadership roles after Bishop Sheard took office. But the worst part was that some of these men weren't strangers. One had worked with the Sheard family for years and had even stayed in their home during revival tours. These weren't just random critics, they were family by faith, and they were now turning against Bishop Sheard. One leaked email even accused Bishop Sheard of putting his own goals ahead of the spiritual welfare of the church, and another even called for a full investigation into church funds even though there was no public proof of wrongdoing. Bishop Sheard had never been connected to any. After the financial scandal, rumors started to spread that Bishop Sheard had become spiritually unfit and should step down for a time of soul restoration. While no one publicly claimed responsibility, handwriting analysis and digital metadata suggested that it came from someone in his own administrative staff. For many in the faith community, perception can be just as harmful as truth. Then came the real heartbreak. An anonymous letter was sent to several prominent church leaders saying that Bishop Sheard should step down for a time of soul restoration. Team, can you imagine how it must have felt for a man who had led a global church through a pandemic, personal loss, and public pressure to be accused of being unfit by his own staff? People who had once praised his leadership were now quietly plotting to remove him. His privacy was gone, his circle had shrunk, and the people he had once praised were now trying to bring him down. What's worse, he never fought back. He never went online to air dirty laundry, he never made public statements calling people names. Instead of defending himself in messy interviews, he kept quiet, which said both a lot and nothing at the same time. But even in that silence, the damage kept happening. Church members could feel the effects, congregations were split, social media debates erupted, and for the first time, COGIC's top bishop was at the center of a painful public unraveling that no sermon could fix. But then he did something that no one saw coming. It shocked even his critics and left his supporters speechless. The church and community were on edge, wondering if this was the end of Bishop Sheard's journey. Bishop Drew Sheard, who had been seen as unbeatable, was about to do something that no one could see coming. After months of suffering, betrayal, internal chaos, and mental and emotional strain, it all came to a head on a Sunday in a packed sanctuary. The air was thick with tension, not praise. People knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. Bishop Sheard walked up to the pulpit with a heavy voice that echoed through the church. His Bible was open but unread, and his sermon notes were still unread. He stood there quietly staring into the crowd for almost a minute before he spoke. What followed wasn't a sermon, a stern rebuke, or a motivational message, it was a confession, a moment of complete human vulnerability. He started by thanking his family, Karen, his daughter Kiera, and his church family for being there for him. His voice cracked as he spoke. He admitted that for the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't enough. He said he was depressed, grieving over the death of his father, and feeling abandoned by the people he trusted the most. He didn't name names or accuse anyone, but the emotion in his voice made it clear that this wasn't just about leadership, it was about deep emotional and spiritual wounds. Then came the shocking part. He said he would be temporarily stepping down from his duties as national leader within the Church of God in Christ. I cannot pour into others if I'm running on empty, he said. Even shepherds need healing, even bishops bleed. People in the room were stunned, some cried, while others sat in silence, trying to figure out what had just happened. Within minutes, gospel blogs posted headlines breaking the news that Bishop J had taken emotional steps back from his leadership of COGIC. This was the first time that a sitting presiding bishop of COGIC had voluntarily stepped away from his position, and it wasn't because of a scandal. It was mentally draining, but the retreat was also a wake-up call for the denomination and the church world as a whole. For too long, pastors and leaders have been expected to be superhuman and preach through heartbreak, lead through burnout, and smile through betrayal. Bishop Sheard's decision, while painful, was also incredibly brave. Some people saw it as weakness, but many praised him for doing something most spiritual leaders are too afraid to do: tell the truth. That night, Karen Clark Sheard posted a photo of herself. There was a picture of the two of them on Instagram with the caption, "Healing Together." Support came from all over the gospel and Christian community. Messages from other leaders like Bishop T.D. Jakes, Donnie McClurkin, and even younger voices like Jonathan McReynolds showed love and respect for Sheard's honesty and courage. But the story wasn't over. While Bishop Sheard may have stepped down as leader, rumors started to spread that some people in COGIC were already working behind the scenes to permanently replace him. Taking advantage of his absence to put a new leader in place, the question now was whether this was really a break or the quiet start of the end. What Bishop Sheard did next would send one last shockwave through the church world, one that not even his closest allies saw coming. As the weeks went by, rumors grew that the Church of God in Christ was at a strange crossroads. Its most beloved leader had stepped away, leaving the organization open and vulnerable, and now leadership vultures were starting to circle. Would this be the end of Bishop? During Bishop Sheard's reign, his enemies finally wrote the last chapter of his spiritual legacy. But what happened next left everyone speechless. While everyone talked about his future, Bishop Sheard was quietly laying the groundwork for a comeback, but not in the way anyone thought. Instead of fighting for his seat at the top of COGIC, Bishop Sheard started investing in something much more personal: his healing and a new way of ministering. According to people close to the family, Bishop Sheard started holding private sessions with pastors from all over the country for sessions that weren't about preaching but about mental health, emotional exhaustion, and spiritual trauma in leadership. He met them in small, private gatherings with no cameras, choirs, or offerings, just honest conversations between broken leaders. He told them openly about his depression, fears, and betrayals, and many of them finally opened up about their own silent battles for the first time. This underground network of support quickly grew, and before long, word started. Bishop Sheard wasn't done yet. He was being reborn not as a powerful bishop with a title, but as a wounded healer who leads from a place of vulnerability. But that wasn't the end of the story. Later, one of the bishops who was there leaked a private recording in which Bishop Sheard said he had turned down an offer to return to full national leadership. "They wanted me back in the seat," he said, "but God showed me a different assignment." In the message, he talked about starting a new nonprofit. The Black Church had long needed a place for rest, recovery, and rebuilding, an organization that focused only on mental wellness for church leaders, PKs, preachers, kids, and burned-out ministry workers. This was the surprise that no one saw coming. Bishop Sheard wasn't walking away in defeat, he was stepping into a calling that was less about position and more about people. Some people tried to call his absence a sign of weakness, but the truth was that he chose healing over power. It started a conversation that the church could no longer ignore, so now that the dust has settled, we look at Bishop Drew Sheard not just as a bishop but also as a flawed, real man. He gave everything to the pulpit, to tradition, to legacy, and in the end, he gave something even more powerful: his truth. He announced that he would be temporarily stepping down from his duties as national leader of the Church of God in Christ, saying, "I cannot pour into others if I'm running on empty." The room was shocked, some people cried, while others sat in silence, trying to figure out what had just happened. Within minutes, gospel blogs posted headlines breaking: Bishop Drew Sheard steps back from COGIC leadership amid emotional confession. This was the first time that a sitting presiding bishop of COGIC voluntarily stepped away, not because of scandal, but because he was emotionally and mentally worn out. But this wasn't just a retreat, it was also a wake-up call for the denomination. In the church world as a whole, pastors and leaders have been expected to be superhuman and preach through heartbreak, lead through burnout, and smile through betrayal. Bishop Sheard's decision was both painful and incredibly brave. Some people saw it as weakness, but many praised him for doing something that most spiritual leaders are too afraid to do. That night, Karen Clark Sheard posted a picture of the two of them on Instagram with the simple caption, "Healing Together." Assist came pouring in from all corners of the gospel and Christian community, messages from fellow leaders like Bishop T.D. Jakes, Donnie McClurkin, or even more youthful voices like Jonathan McReynolds expressed love and appreciation for Sheard's honesty and courage. However, the story wasn't over due to the fact at the same time as Bishop Sheard may also have stepped back from management, rumors started swirling that certain factions within COGIC had been already running backstage to permanently update him, taking advantage of his absence to put in a brand new face at the pinnacle. The query now have became this clearly a spoil or turned into it the quiet beginning of the end, and what Bishop Sheard might do subsequent would send one very last ripple through the Church International, one that no one now, not even his closest allies, saw coming. As weeks-handed hypothesis grew, the Church of God in Christ stood at a typical crossroads. Its most loved chief had stepped away vulnerable and uncooked, and now leadership vultures had been starting to circle. Might this be the give-up of Bishop Sheard's reign? Might his enemies in the end succeed in writing the final chapter of his spiritual legacy? However, what befell next left anyone speechless. At the same time as the general public debated his future, Bishop Sheard was quietly, privately laying the muse for a comeback, however no longer in the way anybody anticipated. As opposed to fight for his seat at the top of COGIC, Bishop Sheard began investing in something a ways extra private: his healing and a brand new form of ministry consistent with assets close to the circle of relatives. Bishop Sheard started out organizing closed-door sessions with pastors throughout the United States, sessions no longer targeted on preaching, however on intellectual fitness, emotional exhaustion and spiritual trauma and management. He met in small private gatherings, no cameras, no choirs, no services, simply sincere conversations among damaged leaders. He shared overtly approximately his despair, his fears, his betrayals, and for the first time a lot of these pastors, some who had by no means dared to speak, subsequently unfolded about their very own silent battles. This underground community of help quick grew, and before lengthy word commenced spreading across gospel circles. Bishop Sheard wasn't accomplished, he became being reborn. Not as a title-preserving bishop on the top, but as a wounded healer leading from an area of vulnerability. However, the twist failed to prevent there. In a private recorded message leaked later with the aid of one of the attending bishops, Bishop Sheard found out that he had declined a proposal to go back to the whole scope of his national management. "They wanted me back in the seat," he said, "but God showed me a distinctive challenge." He spoke approximately launching a new nonprofit agency centered entirely on mental wellness for church leaders, PKs, preachers, kids and burned-out ministry workers, an area for rest, recuperation and rebuilding, something the Black Church had long wished but few dared to create. This was the twist nobody noticed coming. Bishop Sheard wasn't stepping away in defeat, he became stepping into cause, right into a calling that became less about role and greater approximately people. And even as a few critics nevertheless attempted to spin his absence as weakness, the truth changed into plain: his choice to select restoration over electricity had done what no function ever should. It began a verbal exchange that the church should now not forget about. So now, as the dust settles, we study Bishop J. Drew Sheard no longer simply as a bishop but as a person, mistaken, human but real. He gave everything to the pulpit, to culture, to legacy, and ultimately he gave something even greater, powerful: his reality.